Karanasan mo po, tingnan ba nakasalanan ng video?
Media educators and journalists call to defend press freedom.
This corruption in media will introduce
You're watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. We have with us today a one-on-one exclusive with one of the key members in President Aquino's cabinet. He supervises all major government public communication and mass media organizations, including Philippine Information Agency, Philippine Broadcast Service, the Government Television Network, Philippine News Agency, and National Printing Office. We'd like to welcome our special guest for this special episode, Secretary Sonny Coloma. Secretary Coloma, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Jing.
Secretary, can you tell us about the Presidential Communications Operations Office, the PCOO? What is it?
It used to be called Office of the Press Secretary.
Okay.
Now it's called the Presidential Communications Operations Office. So the shift in emphasis is from a press secretary, who mostly would be a spokesperson for the president, to a presidential communications organization, which underlines President Aquino's emphasis on being able to communicate directly to our people and installing some kind of a sounding board or a feedback mechanism that allows government to get a feel of how the people really feel toward certain important issues affecting the life of the nation. So that's what makes the present communications setup of the government distinct and different from the previous one.
And to do this, you use the networks that are under the government. No?
Yes, we have a government television station, which is People's Television. We also have the Philippine Broadcast Service,
Okay.
which has 32 radio stations nationwide, mostly in the so-called missionary areas where the commercial networks are not operating.
Okay.
And we also have two printing organizations, National Printing and APO Production Unit. Philippine News Service, which is a news correspondence agency that provides regular news feeds both here and abroad. And we also have Bureau of Communication Services, a production unit that produces the national, the official gazette and other publications of the Office of the President. So those are the organizations that are serving as the channels through which government gets in touch directly with our people.
Let's talk about the television network, PTV.
Yes.
What is the state of PTV now?
We are in a transition phase. We expect that this week we'll be able to secure approval from Congress of a new law that would enable the government to put in fresh capital into the network and also allow PTV to collect commercial revenues. There's an existing charter of People's Television, which was enacted in 1992, provided a capital of 1 billion.
Okay.
And people won't be surprised to find out that that amount is gone. The network, in sum, has not been able to operate viably, principally because it really did not project a credible brand or a credible image. It was always seen to be simply a propaganda mouthpiece of the incumbent administration or of the president. And it was difficult to establish a base of followership because of the lack of credible product. In terms of the radio station, I found out recently that the equipment is also suboptimal. We need to install new transmitters. While it is true that we are in 32 locations nationwide, there are many areas of the country that are not properly served because the equipment is in a state of disrepair and outmoded as well. So there are many important things that we need to do in order to make the government media organizations responsive and effective.
The law that you're talking about, Secretary, that is going to be discussed this week in
Well, it
Congress?
has actually been passed
Senate? Okay.
in third reading, which is the
Okay.
final stage of approval. The House and the Senate have created a bicameral conference committee that will meet this week
Okay.
and
Come up with a final version.
come up with a final version and then ratify.
Yeah.
Once it is ratified, then we have a law that's ready for the president's signature. Reasonably, if the hectic schedule this week will constrain them, we still have a few session days
Left.
in early January, up
Yeah.
to mid-February, and we are confident that the new PTV law will soon be signed.
That means a infusion of capital into PTV.
Yes.
And the change of personality. Now PTV can earn commercially. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true, and I'd like to emphasize, Jake, that government is not and will not be in competition with the private networks.
So how is it going to?
Well, to
deal
begin with,
that?
the amount of capital infusion of 5 billion is just the equivalent of the 1 billion capitalization that was put in 20 years ago.
Yeah.
We're just restoring it to the same level, practically speaking. And as we know, the leading networks are spending far in excess of that
Far
amount.
more, yes.
Far more.
Far more.
Especially since there needs to be a change from analog to digital technology.
Right.
But we are confident that even with that amount, we'll be able to put up a credible brand. And that brand is a brand of communication that focuses on news and public information, will not deal with crime stories or sensational stories, will not deal with showbiz programs that would be the regular fare of the commercial networks.
Yeah.
So it would not be in competition with the commercial networks.
Where's the income going to come from?
Well, aside from the capital from government, which will fund the modernization of the equipment,
Okay.
we are reasonably confident that there will be enough support for the new kind of programming which we intend to introduce. And we call it public service broadcasting.
Okay.
This is a trend that is now becoming a global best practice. People would be familiar with this brand of broadcasting if they mention BBC or PBS, because BBC and PBS would feature educational,
Right.
cultural,
Correct.
history programs that really endeavor to raise the audience's level of information and consciousness. So it will be distinctly different from the fare that is offered by the commercial networks, and we will not be competing with the kind of programming that they have.
So there's going to be a physical infrastructure improvement from the fresh infusion of capital. What
Yes.
about the mindset, Secretary? The mindset of the people in the government station?
Yes, we are propagating a new kind of mindset, especially among the people in government that are responsible for information dissemination. And we would like our communication to be truthful, to be reliable, to be fact-based, and to be communication that raises the people's level of consciousness. Communication that would create a common ground upon which national consensus on vital issues can be anchored. So this is different from what the commercial networks are doing. And we would like to be able also to promote Filipino culture. Of course, tourism would be another area where we could help in terms of developing awareness about the countless scenic spots in the country that many Filipinos themselves have not even visited.
Yeah.
So it's really public service broadcasting. We will also bring government services closer to the people, enable the frontline agencies to make people aware of their services, and process citizen complaints and citizen concerns faster.
Feedback mechanism. Yeah.
Provide also a feedback mechanism. And of course, we are aware that social media has come into the picture. And as we talk of mass media, the social media element has become an important component of the entire offering.
Well, glad you mentioned it, Secretary, because in the next segment we'll talk about social media, among other things. Let's take a short break. News Cafe will return. You're still watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel, and with us is Secretary Sonny Coloma of the Presidential Communications Operations Office. Sec Coloma, again, thanks for joining us today. You mentioned social media in the first gap. How is that changing the way information is delivered?
I'll give you a recent event that people are very familiar with. The accident that claimed the life of Secretary Jesse Robredo.
Okay.
And we remember that the nation was really saddened by that event, and the attention was really focused on the search, first on the search and rescue operations,
Right.
then on the state funeral,
Right.
and along the way there was a lot of public education on what the late Interior and Local Government Secretary had done as a public servant,
Right.
which was something that was never seen before. This is attention that used to be focused only on a president or
Right.
or somebody occupying a higher position. But because of social media, we believe that we have breached the frontiers of traditional communication. Our study shows that in just the first 4 days of the Robredo
Incident.
death and state funeral, through the social media networks of Facebook and Twitter, we were able to reach almost 15 million people
Wow.
directly. And within that time span, government became a primary source of important news, photographs, and accounts of the current events. Simply because we have direct access to the president,
Right.
and simply because our president chose to play a hands-on role. And there we saw the power of social media in projecting not just a news event, but in building a groundswell of emotion, which I think was by and large very positive. It underlined the fact that civic spirit has been formed in the consciousness of not just adults who are voters, but especially among the youth, whose imagination had been fired up by the work of the late Secretary Robredo.
It used to be that messages went through traditional media, no?
Yes.
And somewhere along the way, sometimes things got lost in translation. Now there's this new relationship between the government and the people, a direct relationship. And I experienced this myself firsthand during the Habagat time, no? Because I was following the tweets of your office and the other government offices as well.
Yes.
And I was using that as content in our own news programs here at Solar News. No? How has this changed the way you relate with mainstream media, or or mainstream media remains what it is, and this is a new focus for you?
Well, we are heartened by the fact that social media has taken root, and it has really expanded our ability to communicate, and it augments the amount of communication that's available. Traditional media would still play an important role. No? But I think the way to look at this is for the traditional channels to also acknowledge that they don't have a monopoly, or they don't have full control of information, and that they must be keenly aware that there are millions of viewers and readers out there that are able to form opinions about current events simply because they have realized they also have the power to communicate by themselves.
Right.
And people are able to project their ideas in real time without having to pass through the traditional mass media. of
What about
communication.
traditional media, Secretary? How has traditional media been in the last 2 years of the
Well, let's
Aquino
take
presidency?
television. No? And one of our friends in print media has coined a term, which is tabloidization of network news. No? And it's, I think it's fair commentary. You know, if you look at the ratings of the commercial
I agree.
TV stations, these are dominated by the telenovelas.
Right.
The evening news is sandwiched no, by telenovela starting in the afternoon.
afternoon.
And then after the TV news, we have more telenovelas up to
Right.
midnight. No? So
So the newscasts are turning into telenovelas themselves.
so we wonder, no, I pose it in terms of a question. We wonder if the programming of the news is influenced by the programs that precede or come after. Because that's where the play of the ratings
And how does
would
that
come
affect?
in.
How does that affect the government?
Well, we recognize it as a reality, but we are not unduly perturbed. No? Because we also have our means of directly communicating with the people. For example, Jing, our Philippine Information Field Agency, field offices, are able to send out on a per region basis 150,000 to 200,000 free SMS with the assistance of the two leading telcos, no, Smart and Globe. And I would like to acknowledge their public service here. They give us an allocation of 100,000 free SMS every month per region,
Okay.
which we're able to use for propagating important news
Okay.
and especially emergency alerts when we have events like Habagat, Typhoon Pablo, Sendong. No?
And these were used during Pablo.
Yes, these were used during Pablo. We were able to use social media actively. No? We were able to use SMS and non-traditional forms of communication. No? And in terms of feedback, we also get direct feedback from citizens, largely mediated also by social media.
Secretary Coloma and I will be back. Let's take a short break. News Cafe will return after these reminders. And we're back. You're still watching News Cafe on the Solar News Channel. And with us, our special guest, Secretary Sonny Coloma. Secretary Coloma, let's talk about the FOI bill. Where is the palace on the FOI bill now?
We submitted to Congress our own administration version of the FOI bill, except that it was not formally included in the LEDAC priorities because there was no time to call another LEDAC meeting.
Okay.
But we do have an administration version, and this was used as basis for framing the current versions that have been passed in the Senate on second reading.
Okay.
And the House version has gone through a committee report. It's just a matter of scheduling it for plenary approval on second and eventually on third reading. We are eagerly observing the events because this is another piece of legislation that, like the RH bill, has finally come into
play.
near
Yeah.
fruition. And this was already approved by both houses in the 14th Congress,
Right.
only to be brought back to square one because they failed to ratify it. So there would still be a slight window of opportunity that's ajar, that's open, and we would certainly want this opportunity to be used by our lawmakers to craft an important piece of legislation.
What's the President's stand on the FOI bill?
Well, we have already submitted our recommendations. They have adopted it. And if we look around us, this is probably the first time that we have a government that has become quite transparent. Our important transactions are posted on the website. There's vital information on disbursements of government budgets and funds. Among government agencies, there's now a seal of transparency.
Okay.
And this is being monitored by the Cabinet Cluster on Good Governance and Anti-Corruption. A government agency must comply with the standards by seeing to it that vital information that's needed by the public are regularly posted and updated on the website. And in the proposed administration version of the FOI, every government agency is also required to come up with its own access rules. No? So this is something that our government is already practicing even
Okay.
without benefit of formal passage. But of course, we want to institutionalize this type of public accountability standard. No? And this is why we share, no, the wish of the advocates, no, that we would have finally a freedom of information law, no, enacted in this country.
The Anti-Cybercrime Act, there's a 120-day temporary restraining order. And
Yes.
How's the palace preparing for this?
Well, the Office of the Solicitor General, I believe, is preparing the government position. President Aquino was asked about this during the Foreign Correspondents Association of the Philippines Forum a few weeks ago. And he said that he reviewed the law and he was convinced this was a law that could enable the government to address some pressing concerns, no? Like the use of the internet in perpetuating crimes like
Right.
human trafficking,
Right.
and other crimes. No? And although it may not be perfect, he said that he had no option to do a line item vetting. So it was either that he would approve it or veto it. And
Right.
on balance, he considered the law to be potentially, no, an instrument for preventing cybercrime, which the government which is the government's responsibility, and that is the reason why he signed it into law. No? Which is not to say that it could still be improved. No? The president in the same FOCAP forum also said that he was in favor of decriminalizing libel, no?
Okay.
So that the objections on that front, no, would be addressed.
As a final question, Secretary, is the message of the president getting across to the people?
I believe so. No? At the end of the day, we look at how our people assess his overall performance, and the reputable rating agencies would tell us it's at 78%,
Right.
which is an all-time high for a
Yeah.
president into the midterm of his 6-year term. His trust rating is also at an all-time high of 80. And considering the demographic profile of our country, where 67% are in Class D, 23% are in Class E, that's a full 90%.
Right.
You cannot have a 78 or an 80% rating if the poorest of the poor or the economically disadvantaged classes are not with you. And this is very important for this government because the economic blueprint of the Aquino administration's social contract with the Filipino people focuses on inclusive growth, which would mean including the last, the least, and the lost.
Lahat kasama.
Lahat kasama, no? And these are the people who are really struggling at the margins of society.
Yeah.
Even as we speak of all-time highs in the Philippine Stock Exchange, near investment grade ratings from Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's, where the rubber hits the road would still be in the urban poor areas where our people are economically disadvantaged.
Yeah.
We still need to reach out to them.
Okay.
They are also the most vulnerable in terms of climate change. There are those that get swept away by landslides and floods. And so they are the important priority beneficiaries of government programs, and our communication efforts are geared towards reaching them and making them understand that we want to achieve inclusive growth on a sustainable basis, and that if we give them information, we expect that they will be able to make informed choices. And when people are empowered in that way, then they will also be able to consciously do the things that are needed to be done in order to improve their own quality of life.
Secretary Coloma, thanks for your time. Thank you for coming over to our studios and talking to us.
Thank you, Jim.
And that's all the time we have for today. We'd like to thank Secretary Coloma for joining us today, discussing the role of government media. Thanks. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook pages. Join us again next Friday for another 360-degree discussion right here on News Cafe. I'm Jim Magsaysay. Salamat po.
Sa kalusagan po, tingnan ba natin sa lahat ng video?
Media educators